At exactly 02:43 hours Moscow time, infrared surveillance satellites operated by Western intelligence agencies detected unusual thermal activity spreading across several Russian strategic military installations simultaneously. At first, analysts believed it could be another overnight readiness exercise. But within minutes, additional data began arriving from radar stations, electronic intercept aircraft, and orbital reconnaissance platforms monitoring Russia's western military districts. Convoys were moving. Missile transporter vehicles were leaving secured compounds. Strategic bomber crews were entering rapid deployment cycles. And multiple nuclear-capable units appeared to be repositioning at the same time across geographically separated locations. Inside NATO command centers, the atmosphere changed immediately. Because this pattern did not resemble a standard training drill, it resembled coordinated strategic force activation. And within minutes, alliance monitoring systems across Europe shifted into elevated alert posture. Fighter aircraft entered readiness status. Air defense operators moved into reinforced command rotations. Reconnaissance flights accelerated across the Baltic and Arctic regions. Submarine tracking networks intensified operations across the North Atlantic. For NATO planners, one terrifying possibility suddenly dominated discussions. Russia could be conducting one of its largest strategic signaling operations since the beginning of the Ukraine war. And the timing could not have been more dangerous. To understand why this deployment triggered such serious concern across Europe, you need to understand how dramatically the security environment between Russia and NATO has deteriorated over the last several years. The war in Ukraine fundamentally transformed the relationship between Moscow and the West. What once remained geopolitical rivalry has increasingly evolved into sustained strategic confrontation. Military production has surged across Europe. NATO has expanded eastward. Finland joined the alliance. Sweden strengthened regional integration. American troop deployments increased near Russia's borders. And Moscow now openly frames much of the conflict as a direct struggle against Western influence itself. That matters enormously, because nuclear signaling becomes far more dangerous during prolonged geopolitical confrontation. At approximately 03:11 hours, analysts reviewing satellite imagery identified activity involving mobile Yar's intercontinental ballistic missile systems across multiple Russian bases west of the Ural Mountains. These are not ordinary weapons. The RS-24 Yars is one of Russia's most advanced nuclear-capable missile systems, designed specifically to survive first strikes through mobility and rapid deployment capability. Mounted on massive transporter-erector launcher vehicles, these missiles can disperse across remote terrain, hide inside forests, relocate constantly, and remain extremely difficult to track in real time. This is why NATO watches them so carefully. Once dispersed, they become significantly more survivable, and survivability is the core foundation of nuclear deterrence. At the same time, another development intensified alliance concern even further: strategic bomber activity. At 03:36 hours, long-range aviation units operating from Engels Air Base and Olenya Air Base reportedly accelerated preparation cycles involving Tu-95MS and Tu-160 strategic bombers, aircraft capable of carrying nuclear cruise missiles across enormous distances. Within NATO air defense networks, alarm levels increased again, because Russian strategic aviation patrols have become increasingly aggressive over the last year. Flights near the Arctic, flights near the Baltic, flights approaching NATO-monitored corridors. Every operation tests alliance readiness while simultaneously projecting strategic power. And tonight, the scale appeared larger than usual. At 04:02 hours, Norwegian and British radar operators reportedly detected increased Russian military air activity near northern operational zones, while NATO reconnaissance aircraft shifted deeper into surveillance patterns over the Norwegian Sea. Above Europe, an invisible intelligence war was already unfolding. Signals intelligence, electronic emissions, radar tracking, communication interception. Every aircraft movement now becomes a source of valuable military data. Modern military standoffs are no longer simply about visible weapons. They are about information dominance. Who sees first? Who reacts faster? Who understands the battlefield more clearly before conflict even begins? At approximately 04:18 hours, American RC-135 rivet joint surveillance aircraft operating near the Baltic region reportedly intensified electronic intelligence collection, while Alliance AWACS platforms monitored Russian airspace activity continuously. Because NATO was trying to answer one critical question: why now? What triggered such large-scale strategic movement? Several possibilities immediately emerged inside intelligence discussions. The first involved deterrence signaling. Russia may have intended to remind NATO that despite ongoing economic pressure and prolonged war in Ukraine, Moscow's strategic nuclear forces remain fully operational and highly capable. The second possibility was more dangerous. Operational readiness rehearsal, testing mobilization speed, testing communication resilience, testing survivability, under simulated crisis conditions. And the third possibility frightened analysts most of all: escalation messaging. A deliberate attempt to increase psychological pressure across Europe during a period of growing instability. Because strategic nuclear deployments are not only military tools, they are political weapons. Every movement sends a message. Every bomber flight, every missile convoy, every submarine patrol. Everything is designed to shape perception, fear, uncertainty, and deterrence simultaneously. At 04:53 hours, reports began emerging of increased submarine activity across portions of the Arctic and North Atlantic. This development immediately intensified NATO concern, because nuclear submarines represent one of the most important elements of strategic deterrence. Hidden beneath the ocean surface, ballistic missile submarines remain among the most survivable nuclear assets ever created. Silent, difficult to track, capable of launching devastating strikes from thousands of kilometers away. During periods of geopolitical tension, submarine deployments become critically important. And tonight, multiple NATO maritime surveillance systems were reportedly operating at elevated readiness levels across northern waters. At the same time, military analysts noted another alarming trend: the compression of decision-making timelines. Modern warfare moves extraordinarily fast. Hypersonic missiles, cyber attacks, satellite disruption, electronic warfare, AI-assisted targeting. The time available for leaders to interpret information during crises is shrinking rapidly, and that increases the danger of miscalculation. One false radar return, one navigation error, one misunderstood launch signature, one accidental collision. An escalation pressure can spiral extremely quickly between nuclear powers. History repeatedly demonstrates that periods of high tension often become the most unstable, precisely because both sides fear surprise attack or strategic disadvantage. This creates what military theorists call escalation instability. And tonight, Europe increasingly appears trapped inside exactly that environment. At approximately 05:31 hours, NATO air forces across Poland, the Baltic states, Germany, and Scandinavia reportedly intensified readiness conditions, while additional missile defense systems entered enhanced monitoring posture. Military aircraft rotated continuously through patrol cycles. Refueling tankers repositioned. Ground-based radar systems expanded. Tracking coverage. Everything about the alliance posture suggested preparation for uncertainty, because uncertainty itself has become one of the greatest threats in modern geopolitical confrontation. Meanwhile, Russian state media amplified footage of strategic missile systems, bomber operations, and military exercises across multiple channels. This was almost certainly intentional. Strategic communication, deterrence through visibility. Moscow wanted NATO populations to see the deployments happening in real time. And psychological pressure matters enormously during nuclear confrontation. Fear affects politics. Politics affects military decisions. Military decisions affect escalation risk. Everything becomes interconnected. At 06:08 hours, additional reconnaissance satellites reportedly observed further activity near logistical hubs connected to Russia's strategic rocket forces. Fuel transports, security convoys, command vehicles, support infrastructure. Analysts emphasize that much of the activity still remained consistent with large-scale readiness operations rather than immediate launch preparation. But the distinction itself offered only limited reassurance. Because readiness exercises can still become dangerous during periods of geopolitical instability, especially when both sides are operating under elevated alert conditions simultaneously. At the same time, another terrifying reality loomed quietly in the background. Modern nuclear deterrence no longer depends solely on missiles and bombers. Cyber warfare now plays a growing role in strategic competition, disrupt communications, interfere with satellites, blind radar systems, corrupt early warning data, and suddenly the risk of catastrophic misunderstanding rises dramatically. This is why military planners increasingly fear hybrid escalation scenarios where cyber attacks, electronic warfare, and conventional military pressure combine simultaneously during crises. And tonight, the entire European security environment appears increasingly vulnerable to exactly that kind of escalation. At approximately 0641 hours, commercial aircraft routes across portions of northern Europe reportedly adjusted flight paths amid heightened military air activity, while civilian aviation authorities monitored potential navigation disruptions linked to military operations. Even civilian infrastructure now feels the effects of strategic confrontation. This is no longer purely military tension. It affects economies, transportation, energy security, public confidence, financial markets. Modern geopolitical crises spread far beyond battlefields themselves. At 0702 hours, NATO leadership publicly emphasized that alliance monitoring systems remained fully operational and that no immediate threat had been detected. But behind closed doors, military planners understood the deeper reality. The relationship between Russia and NATO has entered a far more unstable phase than many governments publicly admit. Strategic trust has collapsed, military pressure continues growing, and both sides increasingly prepare for worst-case scenarios even while attempting to avoid direct war. Tonight, Russian nuclear-capable forces remain active across multiple operational regions. NATO surveillance aircraft continue circling near alliance borders. Submarines move silently beneath Arctic waters, while satellites overhead monitor every convoy, every runway, and every radar emission across Europe. No missiles have launched. No nuclear crisis has officially begun. But the atmosphere surrounding Europe tonight feels unmistakably different, heavier, more dangerous, more unpredictable, because the modern world is entering a new era of strategic confrontation, where nuclear powers operate closer together, react faster, trust less, and fear surprise more than at almost any moment since the Cold War. And somewhere deep inside underground command centers on both sides of Europe's growing divide, military officers are now preparing for scenarios they hope humanity never has to witness again.